My name is Mike Ghia, and I am the Vermont Field Agent for Land for Good. For over 16 years, I've worked with farm families on farm transfer planning. One of the issues that we discuss quite frequently is farm retirement. I also talk about this in Transfer the Farm workshops that we do with farmers around New England. Um, and one thing that I'm trying to expand upon is to make sure that people aren't just thinking about this when they're close to retirement. Think about what does retirement look like, and how can I get to a retirement starting at a much younger age, because planning for retirement becomes much easier, and we see that farm transfers can be much easier when planning is done by farmers at considerably younger ages. Usually I start out by asking people either directly or in a workshop, do you even plan to retire? And the answer to that question is a real mix. Some people never expect to retire. Some people expect to die on the tractor. Other people have that as a goal. They do not expect to work all their lives. And for some people, it's an unknown, particularly when they're younger farmers. They're thinking right what's in front of them and can't foresee that far to know if that's something that that they're going to consider when they get older. When I ask people next is, what do you mean when you say that you are interested in retirement? And that usually opens up the question much more, especially for people who aren't sure if they want to retire, because many people realize that they are at some point not going to work as hard as they have been working, and that they are going to want to slow down. It's not uncommon for me to hear from a dairy farmer in particular, I've heard this more than once, to say, well, just when I get to 65, I don't want to be in charge of a herd of cows anymore. They want to do the work, but they'd rather somebody else be in charge. I've heard this with other kinds of farmers in different phrasings over the years as well. At Land for Good, we have some worksheets and some other literature that's available to kind of help people think through this question of what does retirement mean to them and what does it look like, and does it mean fully stepping out of the business, or does it mean some sort of hybrid situation? What do they want to do with their times? There's a lot of personal and emotional issues that come up, philosophical issues around the physical part of your body and what it's capable of doing that also play a factor in this. The next question I ask people is when do you anticipate this to start? Again, this is a difficult question for people to answer often when they're younger. Often even when people are getting older, they are kind of looking at it, almost year by year. Just how are they feeling? How much energy do they have? How rewarding is what they're doing still for them? Or are they looking to do other things, or the things that they realize they've been putting off doing, and maybe the date seems closer than it did before? Other farmers are very definitive and will say, by the time I'm 65, I really want to have this figured out. And so you have to think about when you give yourself answers for these other first questions, is how do you see yourself transitioning there? Is it going to be an all at once? I want to step out, I want to be done at a certain point, or do you anticipate this more gradual process of just slowing down, putting out more responsibilities to other people in the next generation? So when we get to the point where we're saying, okay, yeah, we're planning for retirement, we definitely know we are going to retire. And I do encourage people to think, who are thinking that they are going to die on the tractor, to have some contingencies, because very often financial or physical aspects, health aspects, does maybe change people's initial plan to keep farming until they're done. And so you really want to have at least a contingency plan, if not that absolute plan to say, I want to have, I want to be able to retire when I want to be able to retire. So I start people thinking about sources and uses. So the uses, of course, is what do you need to live on? And so we start out by thinking about how much do you actually need annually? Even farmers I work with who have good financial information for their farm business often don't have good financial information about their family living. And I encourage farmers from the get-go, at your youngest age that you're involved, to really know not just your farm business, but also your family living expenses. You want to know if the farm or your retirement is covering what you actually need to live on, and you want to know, what is my cost of living? That will change over time, and so as a younger farmers planning for retirement, looking at your current cost of living may seem like it's not going to be pertinent to what you're going to need when you're older, and it probably won't fully be so, but it's a place to start. As people get older and they think, well, okay, my children are going to be out of the house, so that's going to change, but you never stop being a parent. And so very often you're going to still have expenses. You may be helping them with college. You may be helping them with a first home or a new business or a wedding. Your expenses don't necessarily go down as your children leave the nest. Your own expenses may change over time, but you want to start at least knowing where you're at now as a place to start. You want to think about, what is the farm covering of your family living cost? I tell people, look, I'm not the IRS. I'm not the state tax department. If there are expenses that the farm is covering, they're really personal expenses, I'm not going to criticize you, though I will point out that if you were audited, there could be an issue. But I think the more important thing for this discussion is just to figure out, okay, well, if there are certain things that the farm is covering that right now that's really a personal expense, will the farm be covering that when I'm still in retirement? Where will you live in retirement is a big issue, because it is the single biggest cost for any household is your housing. So if you're going to stay on the farm, what are going to be the implications for that in terms of housing for the next generation, or for your own ability to age in place? Is the house a house that could accommodate you if, for instance, you can't do stairs anymore, which is a really common issue? This is something I just went through with my own family not that long ago. My last 2 years of my father's life, he was not able to walk anymore. So he had a wheelchair. Fortunately, everything he needed was on the first floor of the house with a couple of ramps, handrails, changing the shower so he could transfer to a stool in the shower from the wheelchair. He was able to stay in his house until he was able to die, until he died. And for other people, they may have their bedroom upstairs, or the furnace in the basement's a wood furnace and they have to go down to stoke it, and there isn't room to get around in a wheelchair or even a walker. And so these things have to be thought about. If you really want to stay in your home, can you age in place there? Or if you're going to build yourself a retirement home, I give people the same caution. Don't build yourself a house that's going to have a lot of stairs that you're going to have to get around, that you couldn't maneuver around if you had to go into a wheelchair. If you really want to stay in your home, be thinking about that stuff long before anything like that potentially could become a factor. Healthcare needs in retirement is a big factor. This graph here, don't get hung up on the ages, but this is what's called the retirement smile. It's kind of a crooked smile, but basically what it shows is the beginning of retirement. Many people's living expenses stay the same. In fact, for some of the farmers I worked with, it's gone up because they never traveled before. And they said, well, now, this is part of the point of us retiring, is we're going to do some traveling. So now their traveling expenses have gone up. They may have put off house renovation. They said, well, when we retired, you said you were going to renovate the kitchen. So they renovate the kitchen. And so sometimes the expenses actually will go up when you get into retirement, depending on what you do and how you do it. As people get older, they tend to travel less. They tend to spend less money on clothes and cars and things. And so that's where the dip comes in the retirement smile, and your expenses may decline. People put less money into their homes. But then at the end, which tends to happen is that you end up with healthcare expenses, particularly the last 2 years of life is where most people spend the bulk of their healthcare money over the course of their entire lives. And so it tends to go up again as you get older. If you don't get into that dip, of course, then you're going to need even more money to budget towards that potential for healthcare. The other factor that we have to consider is inflation. The standard that's still used is 3% inflation. That's historically over time the average inflation. The last decade, we've been very lucky that it's not been 3%. Matter of fact, at points it's been below 1%, and generally it's been below 1 and 2%. But back in the 70s and 80s, 1980s, we had considerably higher than that. And so everybody still uses the 3% inflation in planning, at least everybody that I've seen. And so if you need $40,000 to retire, the year that you to live on, the year that you retire, then in 10 years, if you had 3% inflation during that entire 10 years, you would be needing $51,000 a year by the time you got 10 years older. And by the time you get 20 years older, if 3% inflation continued along, you'd need $68,000 per year. So most retirement planners, financial planners, will be working with this idea that you're going to have to be planning not just for what your needs are now, but also for inflation. You could factor that in if you're considerably younger and you want to think about what your retirement income might need to be when you get to a retirement age. The thing we want to kind of avoid is getting to the point where you don't have enough, where your expenses are so high and your income so low that you have to consider things that you otherwise don't want for yourself. Now, this one, of course, is this joking about moving back in with someone's parents, but which is more common, of course, is that people might move in with their children, and sometimes that can be really beneficial for everyone, including for grandchildren, for healthcare issues, being able to stay at home longer. Very often, if they have that family home right there, that's not always desirable for every family, though, or even possible. So the next thing the next step, once I've got people start thinking about what are they going to need for retirement, which again is harder for younger people than for older people. And for the younger people, I just emphasize that you want to just know what your family living costs are now and what you want them to be if you're not making enough money from the farm or a combination of farm and off farm to meet not just your family needs, but the desires that you have for your children, that you understand what you're already spending, why you're spending it, control spending on certain items if you feel like that spending is out of control, and then start budgeting for the things that you want and think about how do you get there to make sure that your income is covering that family living expense. So when it comes to planning for the sources of retirement, the list in front of you right now are basically all the potential sources that are out there, or the majority of them that we're most commonly going to see on farms. Most farms are using a combination of these, if not every item that's on these bullet points here. I'm going to cover them each individually here, but just going down the list. Social Security income, investments such as IRAs, stocks, bonds, and savings, spouse retirement income. If you have a spouse that works off farm, and this is very common, they may have a 401k, IRAs, teachers' pensions that may become a part of the sources. Again, knowing that many farmers, they're not ready to just jump out altogether. They might keep working on the farm, or they might find an off-farm career that they find satisfying, or just something that's there to pay the bills. Sale of farm assets, equipment, livestock, real estate. If farmers don't have sufficient amount from these other sources above, these become even more and more important. Having the other sources above actually makes it easier to transition the farm to the next generation, because there may not be as intense a need to maximize the return on equipment, livestock, or real estate. In many cases, renting the farm, the rent provides some additional income for retirement. And then the potential for the sale of a conservation easement is a tool that is often used, but as we'll discuss, is a tool you only use once. Social Security. I really, really encourage young farmers to pay attention to this. and not just tune out. I have had many conversations with farmers of all ages that don't think Social Security will be there when they go to retire. And I will tell you that since Social Security was put into place in the 1930s, there have been predictions of its demise. And I tend to be optimistic that I think that when you look at the changes that we need to do to keep Social Security solvent, they're actually relatively simple if politicians would get the political will together. This is a program that we can keep going. I will tell you, if you do not plan on drawing for Social Security and do not plan tax-wise for that, then it will be a self-fulfilling prophecy, and you will have no Social Security benefits, or you will have minimal Social Security benefits. And I've seen over the years how the different way people approach Social Security has an impact on what's actually available to them. So the Social Security is based on your top 35 years of earnings. Bob Parsons, who was at UVM Extension for many years until he passed on a couple of years ago, used to say that the 11th commandment for farmers is, "Thou shalt not show a profit on the Schedule F." But there are many reasons why you want to show a profit on the Schedule F, including the fact that that shows you have a profitable farm. But particularly when it comes to the retirement issue, people sometimes fail to realize that when you take the profit on the Schedule F of your federal taxes to the SC form, the self-employment tax form, the self-employment tax is going to pay for both the employer and the employee side of Social Security. That's where you get your Social Security credits to give you your minimum eligibility. And that's where over the top 35 years of earnings, the Social Security Administration calculates your Social Security benefit. You can go online at any point to see your Social Security report of how much you're going to be able to draw on Social Security now based on the records of how much you've paid into the system. And I just see that there are farmers, in order to show no profit on the Schedule F and not pay any taxes, will do things like they will buy equipment at the end of the year, or they'll prepay for expenses so they minimize their taxes. And sometimes that's a really good thing to do, particularly if you need a new tractor. If prepaying those expenses helps get you a discount, there are good reasons to do those things. So don't get me wrong, but if you're just doing them to avoid paying taxes, you have to realize that one of the things that's going to hurt you on is the Social Security tax. And there is a way to address that I'll cover in the next slide, but I want to cover two other points first, and that's that one thing that sometimes gets missed is that many farms, at least in the past, this is changing somewhat, have been sole proprietorships where the farm is in one spouse's name, even though both spouses are working on the farm. And so that second spouse is not getting their Social Security credits. And so if that's the way you're structured, you want to look at that. So there are ways to address that. You can have what's called a qualified joint venture as a married couple. Not too many people do that, and you can't do it if you're actually structured as a single entity LLC. But as a sole proprietorship, you can change your structure to qualified joint venture so that your spouse will also get that, they get the Social Security credits. More commonly, I'll see the spouses just file as a partnership or as an LLC that is filing taxes as a partnership so that both partners get the credits, or the one of the spouses will become an employee of the main owner. One of the other things I want to just point out about Social Security, unlike a lot of other investments, Social Security has what's called a COLA, or cost of living adjustment. And so that helps address some of the issues around inflation. So once you've filed your Schedule F and then paid your self-employment tax, the next thing you do is figure out your income tax. And that's the tax that farmers in particular want to reduce. And so the one thing that I point out to people is that there is a line, and this is the 2018 tax form. Of course, they've changed again, but there is a line, in this case, line 28 on this form, where you can put down how much you've contributed to a traditional SEP or simple IRA fund. That takes away, that takes income right off of your adjusted gross income. So that'll lower your income taxes while allowing you to save for retirement. And also you've already paid into Social Security. So that's another tool that you can use in addition to the other tools to reduce your tax liability without hurting yourself in terms of not planning for retirement. There are limits to the contributions, which I won't go into here, but you are able, you and your spouse, to make those contributions to your IRAs every year. Now that does not apply to a Roth IRA, because Roth IRA gets the tax benefit when you go to withdraw. So a lot of people get pushed right off and say, oh, you really want to be in a Roth IRA? Well, when you own a business like this, there in good years, you may want to use one of these other IRAs to your benefit. One of the real keys to being able to save for retirement is to save as early as possible. The sooner that someone starts saving, so young farmers, pay attention here, the sooner you start saving, the better off that you're going to be, because you'll have more of a chance for your savings to accumulate. Waiting till the last minute reduces your ability to be able to generate enough funds in retirement to offset the need that you might have towards selling farm assets. So when you start early, you take advantage of compounding. And I encourage people to start whenever. If you haven't started, there's always this push in this country to people say, oh, people should be starting in their 20s and 30s. And if you haven't, don't worry about it. Start when you have that chance, even if it's just in your 50s. They give you an opportunity to catch up as well in the way the tax laws are written in terms of contributions to IRAs. But start as early as you can. When you're a young farmer, it's very difficult because for many young farmers to think about this, because they're often not making money at first, or they're not making much money. They have immediate costs in front of them, such as children, and they're thinking about, how am I going to pay for college? So there are other ways to pay for college for those in terms of financial aid sources other than savings. So people generally recommend that if you only have money to save in one area, to save in retirement, figure out the college savings as it gets closer. But if you have money to do both, you should do both. Contribute as much as you can, even if it's small amounts, $10 a week, something like that, because particularly if you can start young with even that small amount, the compounding and growth will be to your benefit. When you start putting money into retirement funds, you want to look at what are the fees being charged, because fund fees on some of these managed funds can be very high and really eat into your retirement. There are financial planners out there that can help you look at this sort of thing. There are a lot of course, videos and other resources out there online, publications and such that can help guide you through through your investments. But this is just one of the things to think about. There are social responsible funds that are available, because some people don't want to be necessarily in stock funds or places they don't want to put their money where they don't know what it's being used for. There are different kinds of screens. Some of them are light screens that just take out things. They're not going to, most common things, they're not going to invest in tobacco or firearms or weapons or something like that. And there are other screens that will be more intense that are looking at the businesses. What is their environmental track record? How are they in terms of advancement of women and people of color? And they're looking to see overall the social responsible aspects of the business. And so you can look at those different kinds of funds that are out there. I encourage people to watch the asset allocation. I put that in capitals because that's what I see one of the most common problems I see with farmers I work with is that they started these funds when they were young, and they contribute every year, but they haven't looked at where the money is allocated in terms of riskier investments such as stocks, which have high returns but high risk, and then the less risky funds such as bonds. And as you get older, you want to shift from the riskier funds to the less risky funds. So the general rule of thumb that gets used is 100 minus your age is what you should be in stocks. Again, that's a general rule of thumb. recommend you talk to a financial advisor as well about your particular situation. Some people use 120 minus your age. So if you were 50 years old, if you used 100, 50% would be in stocks and 50% would be in something less risky. And some people would add, if you want to be more risk averse, that you would use something like 80. So 80 minus 50, only 30% will be in stocks. But that will reduce the amount of growth there. So most people are using 100. Some people are using 120 because people are living longer, so they feel like they can weather the risk. Your risk tolerance becomes a factor here. When it comes time to withdrawing the money, again, talk to a financial advisor, but for advice and look at other resources. But the general rule of thumb that we start as a baseline budget is to use 4% withdrawal rule. So in other words, if you have $100,000 in your savings, retirement savings, you could withdraw 4% a year or $4,000 a year safely without depleting it before you retire. That shocks people when they realize, oh, I got 100,000, but I can only use 4,000 a year. So how far is that really going to get me? And that's part of the idea of saving early and contributing as much as you can over time. For most farms, you have to spend a lot of the capital that you have over your career back into the business. And so that inevitably for most farms becomes part of the retirement. I didn't say earlier, but Social Security on average, Social Security Administration say that Social Security makes up about 40% of most people's retirement income. So they can't just survive on Social Security, though I have worked with farmers, that is their only source other than selling assets. And if they're trying to gift their assets to their children, then they really only have Social Security to live on. Other farmers have these savings, and so it becomes, or they're selling their assets and it becomes considerably less. As I said earlier, if you don't have much in the way of Social Security or savings, then the sale of assets becomes even more important to someone actually being able to retire. That means that there has to be somebody that is able to buy those assets at the end. And that's where it can make farm transfers more tricky because then the farmer may need to realize the fullest value of the sale of their assets in order to have enough to retire. It's important to understand the tax implications of these sales because there are capital gains implications. That means that you won't necessarily be able to use all that money towards your retirement, and tax planning is important. Working with a tax advisor is important. Maybe you don't realize that when you sell a conservation easement, that is a taxable event. It is a capital gains tax event. Debts have to be figured in because, of course, they're going to get paid along with the taxes first before you have any money to retire. And being able to address the debts in a way that in a transfer where you're going to keep it, say, within the family or with employees, and they're going to take on the debt, that's going to be something that's going to be a conversation with business planners, with the lenders, to figure out how the debt can be addressed in a way that everybody's going to be satisfied, and then the farmer can walk away with their equity so that they can have some money to retire on. Installment sales can often be beneficial to both generations because the farmer may be able to make back a discounted sale by charging interest, and they will also reduce, which is beneficial to the farmer buying in if they can buy things at a reduced amount. And the farmer may have less of a capital gains tax liability if they take it in installment sales rather than all in one lump sum. Again, talking with tax advisors in this process becomes really important. Of course, installment sales are not without risks. If the next generation of farmer fails to be able to pay and then you have to foreclose on them, that is obviously a very difficult situation. And so planning ahead to make sure that the next generation is in the best position possible and are the best people possible to be able to carry out an installment sale becomes very important to mitigating the risk for that exiting farmer. Easement sales, as I said earlier, they only can be done once. And that's the thing that I really try to get across to people when they think about this as a source of retirement. Sometimes it becomes the only way that we can make the project work. for all parties involved to make it affordable to the next generation and to give that older generation retirement funding. But I point out to the younger generation, they're not going to be able to repeat that. So they should really think about how they're going to plan for retirement, because when they get to retire, they can't sell that conservation easement again. So it's a good tool. I support it. I've been involved with a lot of conservation sales, but I point out to people that you have to understand what it does and what it doesn't do and what the long-term implications are, including on retirement planning for the future generation. Healthcare is a big issue that comes up in retirement planning. You can sign up for Medicare at 65. You have to understand that Medicare doesn't cover 100% of your costs in most cases. And some people are dual eligible for Medicare and Medicaid. Medicare is for acute short-term care and not long-term care or a nursing home. And so planning for long-term care becomes another factor to consider. The wild card is always, what will your healthcare needs be? And a lot of that will come into your personal and family history. So some people, have, for instance, I've worked with a number of farmers who have a history of dementia in their families. That's usually almost always requires long-term care. There comes a point where they can't live at home. And so if there's potential for that within the family, then there might be more of a push or need to consider planning for long-term care. I've worked with a couple of farmers now who have Parkinson's disease. So they know that they're heading to a point where there's a good chance that they're at least going to need at-home support care, if not have to consider long-term care off-site. And so it is a big wild card, because nobody really knows, are they going to be that person who needs that, has a situation where they're going to need that long-term care, or are they going to be like one of our friends in town? He was 76 and he was taking a shot on goal at a adult hockey league game, and he had a heart attack, collapsed on the ice, and that was it. No health care. Exactly probably the way he wanted to go. And so planning for this is, I think, one of the biggest challenges for people, particularly mitigating risks. It costs way more than what people would like it to cost, and it's a challenge for our country and not just farmers. But one thing that comes up is that I hear all over and over again is that losing the farm to the nursing home is a big concern. The fact is that the nursing homes don't want your farm. They just want to get paid. And that's an asset that potentially could be paying them. But there are ways to plan around this. You want to work with a elder care attorney who is familiar with the rules around asset protection and Medicaid, because there is a 5-year look back period if you were to transfer assets, particularly through gifting to the next generation. So that if you go back into a nursing home within 5 years of that transfer, they will look back and if you're looking for Medicaid to cover your long-term health care, Medicaid will say, we need to recover that gift first before we're going to cover the cost of Medicaid, or they're going to recover it after the person has passed along. So, the first thing to do is really to think about your own health, of course, and then to think about things that you can do to age in place, to think about where the potential role of family and providing at-home care. But if a nursing home becomes important, you want to have a plan for that as well. Being able to stay at home, stay with family is the most common way that I see where people are able to, avoid having to go into a nursing home care. But again, it is difficult in certain situations like dementia, where it just really isn't often practical when the dementia patient starts to wander or starts to become physically abusive, that they can stay in their home. So people have to be realistic about that sort of situation as well. There is long-term healthcare insurance out there. Not a lot of people buy it because it's very expensive. It is somewhat less expensive if you buy it when on the younger side of when you're eligible to buy it. but it's still expensive. And so many people try to avoid doing that. There is some life insurance out there that can be used as long-term healthcare insurance. So it's a combination. So if you don't use it for long-term healthcare, it's not that you've just thrown away the premium. It will convert to a life insurance policy if you haven't used it for long-term healthcare. You can consult your insurance agent about that, and longtermcare.gov is a good resource just in general on long-term healthcare, but it also does talk a little bit about these combination life and long-term healthcare insurance, as well as other tools to plan for. So that's the end of my presentation. Hopefully it was useful. Hopefully anyone who gets to see this presentation will get a chance to ask questions of me either directly at some sort of workshop, or you can contact us at Land for Good. Thank you and have a good day.